In this demonstration of Photoshop applications for the web, I'm going to talk about using the slice tool, creating slices, and saving for the web. The slice tool is located in your toolbar, kind of hiding underneath the crop tool. You have a slice tool and a slice select tool. I'm going to go over what a slice is and how to slice an image from your design, assigning an export setting to each slice, and then exporting either an individual slice or several slices at once. So in a nutshell, a slice is really just an area in which we, using the slice tool, click somewhere on my image and drag, and I create a slice. A slice is just a portion or a little bit of an image that I want to actually export as a graphic. Let me show you what I mean. If I go under View and Show Slices, the very first time I show the slices, notice the difference between before and after. I get this little box that pops up over the image, and it gives me the number 01, showing that I only have one slice and the type of slice that it is, with a little icon to the right. And this means that it's an image slice, and it's the default slice, meaning I haven't created any others. If I hadn't created any other slices at all, I could export this entire graphic as one particular image slice. Let's say, for example, I want to export this logo zone. In order to do that, I have to actually slice that portion of the image. I'm going to do this using my slice tool located under the crop tool, and I'm actually going to drag a guide or two from my rulers. And I'm dragging, clicking and dragging guides on all ends of this particular graphic. And the reason that I use guides is it's going to help me more precisely select this particular slice. I'm going to go under View and make sure that Snap to Guides is selected, and then I can turn on snapping by making sure it's checked. I can tell if I click on View and I see that the check mark is now applied to Snap, and that Snap to Guides and Slices is checked. Using my slice tool, and because I've got snapping turned on to guides, I can click and drag around this image. Now I've created a new slice, but Photoshop automatically numbers and creates slices next to any part or portion of the image next to this slice that I make. It gives them a default number until I define other slices. It tries to sort of figure out what other slices I might want to have in the image. But I'm going to be very specific this time and make just a couple of slices. If I go under File, Save for Web and Devices, as we're exploring what slices are, and I use the little hand here, I can click and drag the image and see that this particular slice has been highlighted. I can also tell by zooming in that I may have made the slice just a little bit too wide. It's got a little more information beyond the graphic than I want, and a little bit more information below the graphic. But because I have a slight bit of a drop shadow applied to this graphic, I'm going to keep it like that because I do want this drop shadow effect to be included in this slice. So that's why it's gone over just a tad. I can choose other slices even though I haven't made them by using the Slice Select tool in the Save for Web, and click around and it shows me other slices even though I haven't created any additional. It's showing me the other default slices. I can also now set the slice export settings. I'm going to choose, in this case, a JPEG setting because I have a texture applied. If this was just line art, if this was a logo that only had line art and did not have any gradients or any texture behind it, a better choice might be PNG or GIF settings. But in this case, because of the texture and gradients, I'm going to choose JPEG. And I can test my compression settings, and it actually shows me a little degradation in that graphic as I lower the export optimization settings. So I'm finding that with this texture and gradient, that very high seems to be a more appropriate optimization setting. So optimized is checked, quality is set to 80. I can adjust the quality if I need more granularity in the export settings other than the typical ones that are provided, but I usually find one in here that works just fine for my needs. I'm also going to convert to sRGB, and this is because I've noticed that when this setting is checked, it retains a little bit more of the image saturation, the color saturation. We're going to use Preview, Fine, Internet Standard, RGB. Nothing needs to be changed there. Metadata, we can select none in this case, although we could add some metadata to this image if we wanted to, if it was important. But in this case, we haven't added any metadata, so I'm going to select none. And those are the settings that I'm going to use for this particular slice. When I have completed making the selections for a particular slice, I can select Done and go back to my original image and create more slices. So here's another image that I'd like to slice for the home page, and it's this graphic here. Again, I'm going to use my guides that I'm dragging from the rulers, and I click and drag the guides. I can use my move tool to move those guides around until I feel like I've got a really good portion of that image selected without any other background information. So I don't want any of the background texture to be included in this image. So I have to be really careful just to grab the very edges of this image. I can even go just a little bit inside of it if I want to ensure that I'm not grabbing those background textures. And now I can create my slice using the slice tool. And I have snapping turned on, so it snapped to the guides for me. Now I'm going to create another type of slice. If I've got my layers, I can actually show and hide things that I need or do not need. For example, if I have this graphic here that's really just a background texture behind the content area, I can hide the content and isolate. I can isolate only the background texture. So let's see. I can hide the Greek text, and I can hide the page title. That was a sample. And now I can drag guides. To isolate this background texture that's going to appear behind that content on the home page. And again, using my slice tool and using the guides with snapping turned on, you can see that snap is checked under View and Snap. You can also see that Snap to Guides is checked. I can click and drag with my slice tool and select that area. Now if I go back into Save for Web, and using my Slice Select tool, I can click and choose the various slices. And I can use the grabber hand to move around. And I can change the settings as needed for each individual slice. For example, this background texture could work as a PNG, it could work as a JPEG. I'm going to kind of see which of the image sizes is smaller. So a JPEG set to very high is going to give me a 69 kilobit sized image. I could try PNG, and it's giving me a 301 kilobit image. So in this case, the JPEG compression might actually be the better selection for that slice. So I go back to JPEG. You want to go for the smallest possible image while still retaining the information. And again, if I choose too low of an optimization setting, you can see too much degradation in that image. So I play with my optimization settings till I'm happy with the results with Convert to sRGB checked. This is also an image, so we're going to use JPEG compression again. And when we're done setting those compression settings, we can hit the Done button at the bottom right of Save for Web and Devices. What's an example of a different compression setting? A different compression setting might be used for these little images that are going to become navigation. When you use PNG, PNG supports transparency. A PNG graphic might be the best choice with transparency so that the programmer can overlay this graphic above the texture. The texture can be a background texture, and we could use a transparent PNG graphic for each of the navigation images. So let's say we want to slice up a couple of these navigation graphics and use PNG settings. I'm going to again drag some guides. We want to include this button in its entirety, so it goes just below the descender of the F. I'm going to go kind of in between those two, split the difference, and go ahead and let this one go all the way to the edge of that graphic, which is fine. The top of these can be set. I'm having a little trouble with snapping. It's snapping that guide to a place I don't want it to, so I need to turn snapping off for a moment. Use the Move tool. I'm going to set that guide just below that background texture. Put snapping back on. And click and drag. And click and drag. I've created two new slices. If I go under File, Save for Web, and I have one of those buttons selected, I might choose PNG, and I can choose the matte color that's similar to the background color. Or similar enough to the texture that's behind it. And hit OK. What the matte color does is it lets me know what these letter forms are going to anti-alias to. And so I might use PNG as a possibility for this graphic. So this is just an example of how you can change. If I hit done, you can go back into File, Save for Web, and you can see that Photoshop has retained, for each of these slices, it has retained the export settings that I want to use. Now I can export each of these graphics individually, or I can save them as a group. I find, because it's kind of tricky exporting graphics as a group, I have very specific reasons and naming conventions that I want for each of these. It's usually easier to export each one individually. So I'm going to select a slice. Let's start with this top one. And if I hit Save with that slice selected, I can go use my drop-down menu to use a selected slice only and images only. Notice that Photoshop does export HTML code and images, but the code that Photoshop exports is poor, and we're just prepping images to hand off to a programmer, so we're not going to choose HTML and images. We're going to choose images only, a selected size, and then under Custom I can actually place further settings as to how I want that file saved. Right now it's just going to save it with, if I had a series, the slice name and all of these additional naming conventions. And you can set it to a high detail of naming conventions. You can also choose whether or not you want Photoshop to put the images in a separate images folder, or you can name the folder. There are all sorts of output settings that are available to you when you save an optimized graphic. If you wanted to export all of the slices, you could select all slices at once, all of the images, but they would use the same naming convention as set in your output settings. It would start with probably the slice name or the document name. So it could be related to the website name, hyphen, maybe it's a rollover state, or maybe it's got the date that the slice was created. All of these things can be set in the output settings under Custom for saving files, and it's particularly useful when exporting a bunch of slices. So this just gives you a little overview of how to create slices, how to set your optimization settings, and then saving slices as individual image slices or as a series of images. And it would export every single slice, even the ones that you haven't made. So sometimes it's easier to do one at a time with specific settings. Another thing that's kind of interesting is when you wanted to export one of the PNGs, you would actually have to go into your layers and turn the background off, all of the background layers off. Then you could go File, Save for Web, select the PNG with transparency, and it's going to show you what that's going to look like when you export that graphic. The difference between PNG 24 is this is a newer file format, and only recently have browsers started supporting this file format. But it supports more robust transparency than the PNG 8, which is an older portable network graphic format. So it's interesting to see how you can test the images in Save for Web as you're exporting individual slices. And this concludes your introduction to creating slices and how to save optimized slices using File, Save for Web.